Welcome, everybody. The door is closed. You will not be allowed to move for the next 90 minutes. That's not true. Please don't consider this lockdown in cell block H, for it is not. This is an evening of storytelling called Open Hearth. And I always feel like at that point it deserves a whoop. This is an evening of storytelling called Open Hearth. Thank you very much. That was good. I like how quickly that tailed off. Tonight is very relaxed. That's why we're calling it Open Hearth, and that's why there is but a rug between us. And we have three people, which includes me, and the voices in my head, to tell you some stories, to regale you with some music as well. But it's very relaxed. What tends to happen sometimes is somebody might tell a story and we might be inspired to tell a different story, and occasionally we might talk to each other saying, well, do you want to do this bit next? That's all right, but let me tell you who we are. I'm Dan Serridge. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Who are you?
Jiva from India.
Hello. And who are you?
I'm Marion Kenny.
And you're going to start us off, aren't you?
I am. I'll make my way to the heart. So whenever it's this time of year, as I was saying to Jiva earlier, it's impossible to not remember the amazing people who over the years, who you've either seen performing here on this stage or that you've shared the stage with. And I was saying to Jiva earlier that I really missed Wayupa Tossa, who came here, who was just the most amazing character. And then I just popped down to St Mary's Street for a bite to eat, looked at my phone, and a photograph popped up. And who should it be? Wayupa. So I just showed it to Jiva. But often when I was here, I remember seeing Duncan Williamson, who was a great friend and mentor, and he would often do things. I remember sitting exactly where you are, Eleanor, one year, and he said, Marion, this is for you. And so that's the story I'm going to tell. Well, away up on the west coast of Scotland, on a tiny island, and it could have been any island at all. It could be Lewis, or it could have been Hearth, it could have been Uist, but most people say it was a little island off the Isle of Skye. There lived a fisherman, and his name was Duncan McKinnon. And Duncan had inherited a farm and a bit of land from his parents, and just like them, he was a fisherman. And he was a very good fisherman. But the thing was, well, what Duncan liked best of all was hunting. Because you see, when the weather was nice and hot and sunny, and the stones were warming up in the sunshine, out of the water would come the seals. And they would lie sunning themselves on these hot rocks, and they wouldn't notice Duncan McKinnon for he was as light on his feet as any man. And he had a great big long knife, and he would creep silently, and with this knife he would shove it into the back of a seal, into the neck, and then he would pull the knife along until the skin was loose, and then he would throw the dead seal into the sea, and he would take the seal home. Because you see, that was what Duncan did. He would take the skins from these animals, and he had a room, a drying room in his croft, where he would hang them up to dry, and he would salt them, and he would oil them, and he became very, very famous. Very famous indeed. People come from miles around to buy these skins, and they would turn them into all sorts of things, boots or capes or bags. And in those days, you see, people didn't scowl at this. There was no problem in those days with people catching seals or catching whales to make their living. But there was one thing that Duncan Mackinnon never ever did. He never ever would touch a baby seal. Not a baby seal, not a young seal. Never ever touch one. Now, some people said that it was because they weren't big enough and so the skins weren't really worth anything to him. Other people said he was a bit soft about catching the babies. But nonetheless, that's what Duncan Mackinnon liked. He liked to hunt the seals, take the skins. But as time went on, it was very strange because there was one year people suddenly stopped buying the skins. Duncan didn't know why, but his storeroom was filled with skins. He didn't understand it. But there was one night, and it was about this time of year, the clocks had changed and the nights were drawing in. Duncan was sitting in his croft in front of his turf fire. He was having a wee dram of whiskey, and he could hear that there was a storm brewing outside. The wind blew the smoke back down into the chimney and into the little room where he was sitting. He could hear the rain dancing off the window panes. And he was smoking a pipe when all of a sudden he heard. And he wondered, who on earth could it possibly be coming to his croft at this time of night on this terrible, foul evening? Because you see, his croft was miles from the nearest village and he hardly ever had any visitors. But there it was again. Duncan got up from his feet and he opened the door. And as he did, there, sort of in the strange sort of twilight, there was a big, tall stranger. You could hardly make him out because he had a great big coat, a huge coat, and the collar was pulled up. He had jet black hair. And he said, "Can I help you?" And the voice said, "Are you Duncan Mackinnon, the seal hunter?" And he said, "I am, surely," he said, "but don't be standing out there on a night like this. Come on in, come on in." And so this big, tall stranger walked through the door and Duncan shut it. And he was a big man. A big, big man, over 6 foot tall. He had this great, big, long, dark coat that was reaching down to the floor. And he had jet black hair. And Duncan looked at him and said, "How can I help you?" And he said, "Duncan," he said, "I was wondering, do you have any seal skins for sale?" Well, that was music to his ears. He said, "I've got plenty of seal skins for sale. Lots and lots." And he said, "My friend would like to buy them all from you." He said, "Your friend?" He said, "Well, where is he?" He said, "Well, he's at the top of the cliffs and he was toiling a wee bit walking here." He said, "But would you come up with me now to meet him?" Duncan said, "Of course I would." He said, "Just wait a minute," he said, "I'll go," he said, "and I'll get my coat." So Duncan went and got his coat And now when they walked out of the door together, well, the rain had stopped. And he started following this stranger who walked at a strong, strong pace fast along the beach. And he wasn't interested to talk to Duncan. Duncan had all he could do was to keep up with this man. He had strides, great big strides. And as Duncan struggled to keep up and he looked down, he could see he was wearing thick leather boots and thick woolen socks. And he looked at him striding along. He was a big, strong, muscular man. And as they walked and they walked, he could see the moon was starting to come out from behind the clouds. And they clambered up, 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 up the cliffs. And as they did so, there was a breeze blew and the moon appeared from behind the clouds. It was a strange, magical sort of light. And as they reached the top of the cliffs, he saw this big, strange man walk towards the edge and he shouted, "Are you here, friend? Are you here?" And there was no sound at all. And he did it again. "Are you here, friend?" By now Duncan was standing next to the man and he turned around and he said, "Do you think he could have fallen over the edge?" And Duncan stood at the edge and he just glanced. And the cliffs are about 500 foot high. And this was a full moon. It was a high tide, very high tide. It was very deep and it was lashing against the cliffs and the wind was blowing. And Duncan was about to say something when all of a sudden the stranger put his arm around him and he put his mouth over his mouth, hand over his mouth, and he found himself diving off the edge of the cliff. Down, down, down they went, down, down, until Duncan felt himself going into the water. It was icy cold, it was freezing cold. He could just about make out the moon glinting through the waves as he went deeper and deeper, and the light of the moon got fainter and fainter. And this man, well, he was a powerful swimmer. He could feel him swimming and swimming. Duncan felt the tide. He could feel the muscles of this man as they swam deeper and deeper and deeper. And he could feel himself losing his breath, all the oxygen going from out of his lungs. And then he felt his body turn around and his feet touch the bottom of the sandy shore. They'd reached a tunnel, an underground chamber into the cliffs. And as they stood there, the stranger took his hand from Duncan's mouth and he took a huge gasp of air. And then he felt himself being dragged through this tunnel. And he could see up ahead there was light leading the way. And he dragged him, almost pulled him on and on until they came to a chamber. And in this chamber there were huge flaring torches all around the wall. And here there were lots of stone seats, and on every one of these seats was sat a person. All different ages. There were old men with long silver hair flowing to the floor. There were women with long dark hair and they had babies swaddled onto their backs. There were young boys, young girls, peoples of every age. And this man took Duncan to the middle of the room and he said, "I have bought Duncan McKinnon." And the people with their huge brown eyes looked at Duncan and not one of them said a word. But every single man raised up to his feet and each of them had a long silver hunting knife. And they began walking towards Duncan, who was terrified. And he said, "What have I done? What have I done?" And this man said, Duncan McKinnon, he said, you have been killing our people. And Duncan said, I've never killed anyone in my life. He said, you have been killing our seal people. And the men with the knives stood still in a circle around Duncan. And he said, Duncan, he said, yesterday you stabbed my father. Now you come and you see what you've done to him. And Duncan followed this stranger into another chamber. And there on a huge long stone was lying an old man. Duncan could see his back was facing him. And in the back of the neck was a huge knife. He said, now look at my father and you look what you've done to him. And as he walked closer, he could see that there was no colour left in this man's face. It was pure white, ashen white. And he looked at the eyes and there was no light of life in them. And then the stranger said, now Duncan, he said, is this your knife? And he said, yes, it's my knife. He said, now pull your knife out of my father's back. And Duncan pulled the knife out and the stench was foul. It stank and pus came out and blood came out of this wound. And he said, now Duncan McKinnon, you kiss that wound. And Duncan leant forward and he thought he was going to be sick because of the smell of the wound and the pus. But he put his mouth against it and he kissed it. He kissed the wound. And as he drew back, he saw the wound heal before his eyes. And before his eyes, he saw the ashen white skin of the old man take colour. He could see the blood coming back to it. And when he looked into the eyes of the old man, he saw the light of life pulsing in them. And the old man sat up and he said, thank you, Duncan McKinnon. And as the old man regained his life, he stood up, he said, Duncan, he said, there's one thing we have to thank you for. Because although you have killed many of our people, you have never ever killed one of our babies. You've never killed one of our children. And for that reason, Duncan, we'll give you a second chance. Come now. And they walked back into the chamber. And all of the seal people, all of the silkies, stood or sat gazing at Duncan. Not one of them said a word. And the old man said to one, he said, no, he said, go and get that bag for Duncan. And when they came back, it was like an old leather satchel, a very worn old leather bag, encrusted with salt. And the old man handed it to Duncan and he said, now Duncan, he said, make sure you look after the seal people. And with that, the man who had taken him there took him by the arm and he led him back through the tunnel. And when they got to the entrance, he said, Duncan, he said, hold on tight to that bag now. And once more he put his hand over his mouth and they dove into the sea. And once more Duncan could feel the strong muscles of this man as he swam and he swam up until Duncan could see the light of the moon coming down through the water. And as they reached the top, the old man took a huge gulp of breath and they swam faster and faster and faster until they reached the shore. And he was dragged onto the shore and the sulky looked Duncan in the eyes just once before he turned and he watched him swim out into the light of the moon where he disappeared and he was gone. Well, Duncan was exhausted And he got up to his feet and he got this leather satchel and he rushed into the cottage and he shut the door, and the first thing he did was he took the whiskey bottle and he poured a glass of whiskey and he drank down one and he drank down two and he drank down three. And then he changed out of the wet clothes into the dry ones and sat down. And he looked at the leather satchel, and when he opened it up and he tipped it upside down, out fell hundreds and hundreds of golden coins. He went over to the prayer corner in the cottage and he took down a little Bible and he sat down and he placed it on his knee, and he swore from that moment he never ever again would ever hurt or harm a Selkie. And he used that money to buy a little island that he knew that the seals loved to sun themselves and bathe themselves. And that's where Duncan lived for the rest of his life. And he always looked after the Selkies.
Oh, I feel salty, Marion. You've taken me to the sea, you do. Well done. It's almost like I've worn this jumper for that very moment. But I haven't. Did make a choice to wear this jumper. And you might be sitting there thinking, why have you worn a moth-bitten, woolen, Aran jumper down? Well, don't worry, I'm going to explain it to you. With another story, but before I get there, I need to take you back a few months. And in order to do that, I need to give you a riddle, for you have sat there and listened beautifully, but now it's time for you to do some work. And it's very simple. I'm in a room full of storytellers, so I'm expecting big things. And in fact, if you're sitting there and you know the answer straight away, don't shout it out, because nobody likes the person that gets a riddle right the first time. It's a rule. The riddle is this: eye of black and mane of yellow, I am taller than you, my fellow. Eye of black and mane of yellow, I am taller than you, my fellow. Anybody who isn't incredibly confident of the answer would like to have a go, because I always find riddle answers are best when you get them wrong. Oh, there's a hand up at the back there, yes.
Sunflower?
Oh, we all hate you. I don't. I love you. Give that person a round of applause. And we'll come to that in a second, if you'd like another story.
Yes.
Okay, that's good. That was a really understated response. I'm going to try again. If you'd like another story.
Yes.
I have worn this jumper for a reason. I've worn this jumper because I feel like Marion started it with an ode to the storytellers gone by, but I'm going to do an ode to storytellers that are still with us. For a number of my stories have arrived from the mouth of another Cumbrian man. Well, he's not Cumbrian, he's actually from the Midlands, but he lives in Cumbria, and his name is Taffy Thomas. Taffy Thomas I've had the fortune of working with many, many years ago, and he told me this story when I was 21. I'm not 21 anymore. And since that time, I have become a father myself. And since that time, I've seen my own father become more and more fragile and vulnerable. And he made this jumper. This is my dad's jumper that my mum taught him how to knit. I lost my mum when she was 6 years old. And this jumper, despite it occasionally being moth-written and too short at the sleeve and a bit itchy and scratchy, connects me to these people. And I'm trying to understand what it is to be the strongest member of my family, with young children at one side and a father who's more vulnerable at the other, and what that means. And as I've started to understand that, this story that I'm about to tell you begins to make that little bit more sense, or has grown in my mind somehow. So I'm going to tell it. And this story is for anyone out there who's got a complex relationship with their dad. Suitably broad. But I'm going to ask a question in the middle of it, so do be prepared to shout things out. But it starts with a king. And it starts with a king who enjoys doing one thing and one thing only. He enjoys walking, cane in hand, through his gardens. And his gardens are some of the most fine gardens you could ever possibly imagine, and he enjoys those gardens no matter what the season is. He'll go out there in the spring and he'll watch the bluebells arrive. He'll watch the curtain of bluebells fall on the floor. He'll wander through the garden and he'll smell the herbs from the thyme. He'll smell the smells from the thyme and the rosemary and the sage and the marjoram. He'll come to the fruit trees. And when the time is right and when the season is right, he'll pull down the lemons and he'll pull down the oranges. And when the seasons turn and the leaves begins to fall, he'll go to the orchard and he'll pull those crisp apples off those branches. He'll bite into them. He'll go and look at the cornflowers and the daisies and the dandelions in the wild garden. But when the weather is warm, there's one thing he likes to do more than anything else in the world. And that's to sit on the bench just by his sunflowers. And what he likes to do is he likes to watch as the sun disappears over the horizon. And you, as well as I, know that when the sun disappears over the horizon, the sunflowers will follow it. And they'll begin to droop. Now, does anybody know what happens when the sun eventually does disappear? The sunflowers will turn and briefly bask in the warmth that's still maintained on their petals and hold that warmth in their bodies for that tiniest bit of time. And when the sunflowers do that, our king, he'll turn to the bench space next to him, and there will be nobody there that he can turn to and feel the warmth of, for he is now very, very old. He has grown old and he has grown tired, and in that long life he has seen people go and die and disappear, and he is left alone. And like many old men, he's riddled with worries. And he sits there and worries, and then he turns and he sees the empty space and he worries some more. And when he looks out to this beautiful garden, his baby, the garden that he has built over all these years, he starts to worry about who is going to take it on after he dies. So he decides that the only way to do it is to have a competition. To put out a call to the whole of the kingdom to see who can be honest and trustworthy to look after this garden after he's gone. And so he puts the call out that he's going to host a sunflower growing competition. The person who can grow the tallest sunflower, as you can know they can grow pretty tall, will win. Will win the garden, will win the castle, will win everything. And the call goes out. And it isn't long before the day of the competition arrives. The start. And the start is signalled by the king standing on the roof of his castle, seeds in hand, and he will scatter them over the walls, and they begin to bounce on the flagons of stone. They disappear into the crevices of the pebbles and the cobbles. They disappear under the horses and into the horse manure. They disappear all across the streets, and everybody is gathered round waiting to catch them. But there is one girl who longs to win this garden more than anything else in the world. She's there first thing in the morning. She waits for the moment that the seeds drop, and she waits to find the perfect one. And the reason she wants to win this competition more than anything else in the world is her dad. He's the head gardener. He's grafted. He's put in Lords of Hours to build this garden and make it as beautiful as it is, and she sees this is her chance to give him a gift, to say thank you. And so she waits, she watches the seeds fall from the side of the castle. She watches them bounce, and she desperately searches through them to find the perfect one. She holds them to the light, and she hopes that there will be a clue, that there will be a sign as to what will be the perfect one. She even listens to see, to hear if that sunflower seed is going to be better than anything else. And then she finds it. Oh, she knows that's it. And she holds it in front of her face, and she runs as fast as she can down those streets, over those cobbles. People are practically leaping out of the way to avoid this girl who is on a mission. She arrives back at her house, and she instantly begins the process of growing a seed. And this is where I ask you, how do you grow a seed? What does she do first?
Plants it.
Plants it, very good. She finds some juicy soil and she fills a pot and she places it in. What does she do next?
Cover it up.
Covers it up, very good. She covers it up. I like the way that that's described. She covers it up. What does she do next? She waters it. She probably filters that water, Evian or something, but she takes that water out. Make sure it's the finest water you could ever possibly imagine, and she pours it over the soil. What does she do next? Bit of fertilizer. I'm not going to ask any specifics as to how she fertilizes the soil. That's for you to imagine in your own time, depending how organic she likes to keep it. But she does indeed do that. What else does she do? Yes, she does both. So she pushes it into the sun, and as the sun moves, she moves the pot further. Even if it goes into shade briefly, she'll move that pot over so it's in the sunshine, and she'll do her best to keep it warm. Yes, what else does she do? She waits. She's very patient. Sometimes she waits, and sometimes she finds it hard to wait, but she knows that waiting is the only way. And so she sits and she watches and she waits. And in that waiting, she needs to find ways to kill time. What does she do? She does. She sings. She talks. She tells it stories of the day. She sings songs. What songs might she sing?
Will you go, lassie, go?
I'm sorry, I don't know that one. Could you just...
I brought that on my own head. Will you go, lassie, go? And we'll all go together,
Sleeping one mountain thyme,
all around the blooming heather. Will you go, lassie, go?
She sang that song, and she told stories, and she would occasionally dance around the pot, and she would occasionally lean in and give the pot a little hug. And all the way through these different things, through the planting, through the fertilization, through the watering, through the turning to the sun, to the singing, to the dancing, to the stories, her dad would be watching from the window. But there was one thing she did when she knew her dad wasn't looking. She'd lean into the pot. She'd let her lips come very, very close to the edge, and then she'd just whisper quietly. She'd say, "I love you." The day of the competition arrives. The day to bring the pot before the king arrives. Has anything grown in the pot? No. You're all disappointed, I know. Not a single thing has grown. I don't know where her hope has gone, but it stayed all this time. And on the morning of the competition, she runs to the pot. She sees that there is nothing in there. Not a single sapling has emerged from the soil, and she can feel the emotion swelling up inside her. She can feel the tears rising in her cheeks. She can feel those cheeks getting hotter and hotter, and she runs upstairs and she collapses on her bed and she places her head in the pillow and she breathes these heavy breaths, and she sobs and she wails and she cries and she can't stop. Walking by in the corridor, in that moment comes her dad. And as you can imagine, a gardener at that time, he was a quiet man. Didn't say a lot of words, didn't often step into the breach when emotion was on the table. And still he opens the door. And he walks in and he sits on the edge of the bed and he lets her cry. And she knows that he's there, but she cannot stop. And after a while, she feels those thick fingers on her back. And she feels him rest his hand on her back, and she heaves her breath up and down and up and down. And then he speaks and he says, you need to take your pot to the king. Not because you've worked hard, not because you've bent double over that seed, putting your energy into something, but because you care. Because you want something for somebody. And then he leans down and he lets his lips just come really close to the edge of her ear and he whispers, I love you. And he stands up and he leaves. And I don't know what it is, but it's enough for her to steel herself. She pulls herself up from the bed. She wipes those tears away from her streak-marked face and she walks down the stairs and out into the garden. She picks up the pot, the empty pot, the pot that is merely filled with soil, and she sets off on foot through the streets, across the cobbles, step by step. But this isn't the end to the shame, for with every step she takes, she sees coming out of the ginnels, coming out of the alleys, coming out of every single street, there appears people with pots with sunflowers, 5 foot, 6 foot, 7 foot, 8 foot, 9 foot tall, that tower over her, that force her shoulders to bury down over the pot as she makes every single step. Each step feels hard and she can hear the sniggers, the laughter coming out of people's mouths as they pass that empty pot. And with every single step it becomes harder as she sees more and more arrive. Eventually she comes to the castle, and they all line up there from smallest to biggest. And they all look along, and she peers, because she's at the far end, she peers right across. And all it is a wall of yellow and green. And suddenly there is an announcement. If this was more of a family-friendly evening, I'd get you to pretend to do a fanfare, but we won't do that tonight, to spare you. The fanfare is made, and out comes the king with his walking stick, and he walks down and he looks at this huge line of sunflowers, and he walks down the stairs, and he begins to prod at the soil. He begins to test the strength of the stem. He'll lift up the leaves and take a little peek and hold it and look at it in the sunlight. He'll take his stick and he'll just prod at the flower, at the face, at the eye of black and the mane of yellow, and he'll then wave it across the top to assess its height. And he'll work his way all the way down the line until he came to our girl at the end. And he took his cane and he taps it 3 times. Tap, 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 what's this? Tap, 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 what's this? And she looks at him and she can feel the emotion swelling up in her eyes again. And she can feel that heavy tears arriving into her eyes, and she imagines herself back on that bed, sobbing into the pillow, and she says, Your Majesty, I tried my hardest. I planted it in a pot, I fertilised it, I covered it up. I moved it into the sunlight, I watered it with the finest water I could. I turned it to face the sun, I protected it, I danced with it. I told it stories, I sang to it. I even told it I loved it. Nothing grew. The king nods, bows his head, slightly embarrassed. And he turns round and he walks up to the top of the stairs. And he turns round and everybody is waiting with bated breath, hoping that they will be the ones that get the garden. And he holds up his cane and he says, We have a winner! He takes his cane and he points down at the little girl. And he can feel that there's a bit of anger in the room. There is a hubbub. Rhubarb, 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 bacon and eggs, bacon and eggs. People are talking, and that fury is rising. But before he can, the king explains. He says, she has won. For every single seed that I cast off the castle that very day had been boiled within an inch of its life, and nothing should have grown. And she is the only one honest enough and reasonable enough to turn up here with an empty pot. And for that reason, she shall win. And after the angry mob calmed down, there was a big cheer. And the girl was welcomed up the steps, and she was taken in, and immediately the king and her walked the gardens. He showed her every single bit that he loved more than anything else. He showed her what she was going to inherit. He showed her what she was going to inherit, and she thought about her father and what he was going to do with that garden. And at the end of that day, they sat on that bench. They sat together and they watched the sunflowers disappear. They've watched the sunflowers follow the sun and then disappear over the horizon. And they watched the sunflowers then turn to face each other. And then they turned to face each other. And for a moment, they basked in each other's warmth. And every day they did this until it came to that point where the king was no longer. And he shuffled away. And then her and her dad would walk the gardens, enjoying the same areas and new areas until eventually they too came to the bench, and they would watch the sunflowers disappear over the horizon, the sun disappear and the sunflowers droop, and the sunflowers turn to face each other, and her dad would look each other in the eyes and bask in each other's warmth. And even though we sit in the Scottish Storytelling Centre in autumn as the leaves fall and there is barely anything left of the sunflowers, I'd encourage you all to turn to the person next to you and for a moment just bask in their warmth. And that's the end of that. Well, I'm very hot in this jumper. But I'll manage, don't worry. Jeeva,
Yeah.
can you go next?
Yeah, it's going to be tough on me. After the Scottish setting, it's going to be Indian setting. Everything is going to be so different. Starting from the greetings. Vanakkam. Vanakkam. Which means hello in my mother tongue, Tamil. I come from the capital city, Chennai, the state of Tamil Nadu. So let me start with a little song, and maybe you can join me. Or not even a song, probably a rhythm. Are we ready?
Yes.
Tannane nananane. Tannane nananane. Tannane nananane. Vandene Hattiya Kari. I didn't expect that. Fantastic. Kadaigal Cholla. Vandene Hattiya Kari. Here comes the storyteller. To tell you all. Stories from India. You see, it is so different from Scottish storytelling. Both of them sat. Can an Indian sit? No. And it was so delicate. Can I be that way? No, because we are made that way. You go to an Indian and say, do you know the way to the market? They won't say, just walk straight and you can go turn to the right, turn to the left. You go straight. There will be a tree over there. You take the right and you go there. There will be a temple over there. From the temple, you go left over there. There will be a big thing. Everything has to be animated. Why am I saying this? It's because I'm going to take you to a village in Tamil Nadu. All right? I'm sorry, you'll have to see my back. Excuse me. All right? Not so beautiful. Anyway. So in a small village lived a young couple. Muthu was his name and his wife was Maragadam. Muthu means pearl. Maragadam means emerald. That was their names. They were newly married. Right? One day, Muthu came home from the farm and Maragadam said, Enanga. Indian body language, okay? Enanga. Atta. Atta means my dear. What is it? You know, Indian men, patriarchal society. Men always feel. He said, what is it? Huh? And she said, Onnula, my mother needs help in the farm. Tomorrow is the harvest day. That's how humble Indian women are. Not now, huh? This story happened long ago. Listen, I have 100 things to do. I can't be going here and there and everywhere, okay? Said the husband. Immediately, as all Indian women use the secret weapon of crying. I know. After my father died, my mother is helpless. I'm the only child. No brother. Nobody to help. I thought you will not only be a son-in-law, you will also be a son. At once, nothing is better than crying. Best weapon. So the husband said, oh, go. After all, they were newly married. Come on, my dear. I was trying to explain to you. Because he knows what difficulty he will have in bed tonight. So he'd rather agree. He said, okay. I shall go tomorrow morning, all right? Now, don't worry. So she said, really? I love you so much. That was in the morning. The rooster crowed early in the morning and he woke up and he quickly brushed his teeth and had some idlis, that's the rice cakes, and he started to the mother-in-law's house. There was no cart, there was nothing, he had to go walking all the way. Now I have to tell you something about this gentleman. This young man gets distracted very easily, very forgetful. He had two things. And every time he forgot something or anything happened, he would utter this word. Attiribacha. Can you try that? Attiribacha. Keep it in mind, okay? It can be useful. We need it. Now he went singing to his mother-in-law's house. Can we sing together? All right? Deem tanakadeem. 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 If he walks at this speed, he'll never ever reach. Let's make it a little faster, okay? Deem tanakadeem. 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 He said, Atte, which means mother-in-law. And in those days, mothers-in-law never came in front of the sons-in-law. They're very shy. Respect. So the mother-in-law stood behind the door and said, Vanga Maple. Yes, son-in-law. Welcome. He said, yes, I have to go to the farm. Can you tell me what I need to do? Asked the son-in-law. And the mother-in-law said, you have to, all the men and all the women are there. Please go and just supervise. All right. I'll send you some lunch. All right. And he walked. Deem tanakadeem. Deem tanakadeem. A deem karakadeem, deem karakadeem. And there when he went, oh, the harvesting was going on. They were singing so that they don't feel the strain of work. Ta-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. Ta-na-na-na-na-na-na. Ta-na-na-na-na. Ta-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. Ta-na-na-na-na-na-na. And by lunch, the mother-in-law had sent a nice, huge tiffin box of rice and dried fish curry. Whoa, it tasted so good. He had a good meal and he went to sleep. By then, the farmer started working. After resting, the evening work was all done. Everything was bundled up, everything was ready. Now that the harvest work was over, he returned home and he called out, Ate! Mother-in-law, work is done. Yes, thank you, thank you. I have some snack for you. Please have some. And out on a banana leaf were laid some nice white dumplings. Now, there is a name for the dumpling. And I would like you to try telling the name. Bit of a tongue twister. Kolkate.
Kolkate.
Very good. I'm sure Scotland and India are related in some way. Beautiful. So Kolkate. These dumplings look so beautiful. On a green banana leaf, these fluffy ones. He picked up one. He had never ever seen anything like this before. He had never tasted. His wife had never made anything like this. He took a bite of it. Oh, it melted in his mouth. Juicy, sweet, bit of coconut flavor. Right down his throat. Very nice. One more. One more. One more. One more. He ate almost 10 of them. He wanted more, but he was feeling a little shy. But the clever mother-in-law knew. She said, Ma Claire, son-in-law, would you like to have some more? Yes, he was served more. Again, he went, oh. So good. Now, he didn't know the name. He wanted to know the name. He said, mother-in-law, what's the name of this snack? Don't you know the name? I'm sorry, I don't know. Your daughter has never made this. And from inside she said, really? Oh, Maragadam is so good at making this. She makes it very well. Please go tell her. But what will I tell her? What's the name of the snack? And she said, who remembers it? Korkata. Right? What did she say?
Korkata.
There you go. Okay, Korkata. Yes. And I told he has a problem. What? In order not to forget, he started to chant. He said goodbye and started walking. This time he didn't sing his favorite song, but he sang Korkata 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 You're supposed to sing with me. Stop. You're getting reckless. Go on. I hear this. Never mind. Whatever comes to me. As he was walking, he saw a few men sawing up the tree. And the tree went saraka paraka saraka paraka saraka paraka saraka paraka saraka. It sounded nice to his ears. He said, saraka paraka saraka paraka saraka paraka kolkata kolkata saraka paraka kolkata saraka paraka saraka paraka saraka paraka. Kolkata went off his head. Saraka paraka came inside. So he started saraka paraka 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 and as he was walking, he heard the women threshing the rice, and that went chicka 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 chicka. He stopped back. Chicka 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 chicka. That's even better. And he said, Saraka parak went off. Chakka chicka came inside. So he went chakka chicka 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 chicka chakka chicka chakka chakka chicka chakka chicka chakka chicka he enjoyed, and as he went by the riverside, the washermen were washing clothes, and they went doppu 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 doppu. Doppu, even better. And so chikku chakku went off, and doppu doppu came. So he started singing doppu 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 doppu. Doppu 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 doppu. And as he was singing and as he went, there was a small canal. Now he had to jump over it. And as he was jumping, instead of saying doppu doppu, he said attirivacha. And that was it. He started singing attirivacha, he 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 attirivacha. Faster. Attirivacha, he 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 attirivacha, he 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 attirivacha, he 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 attiri. And as he sang through the village, people heard him, and all the villagers started singing. And he sang and he sang and he sang and he reached home. His wives also, and he went and when he reached home, and of course people went on their own way. And the wife said, looks like you had a good time. He said, attirivacha, attirivacha, attirivacha. I had a wonderful time. Wait a minute. He said, what is it? Oh, your mother gave me a fantastic snack. It is so delicious. Really? Ooh. What was it? Ooh. I don't know how to explain it. Wow. Fluffy, nice, white, soft. Wow. juicy inside. Yummy. Oh, I can't express. Oh, I loved it. Oh, I can still get the smell of it. And she said, oh, really? What kind of snack is that? May I ask? I was just telling you the name. Where? Just now was singing. What? I just sang. The whole village was singing with me, and you were also shaking and dancing with me. And that's the name. The name. What's the name? What's the name? Huh? Silly fellow. Stop it. What do you mean? I said, Atiri Bacha, what's your problem? I said, stop it. Stop. What? There is no Atiri Bacha. Never heard of Atiri Bacha. Don't say you've never heard. Say that you don't know how to make it. I know. Your mother said you make the best Atiri Bacha, and now you're saying you don't know. Honestly, I don't know. There's nothing called a... Don't be sarcastic. Stop that nonsense. Wipe that smile off your face. I'm the man of the house, don't you know? Men in India should be respected. You're supposed to fall on my feet. Right? Give me respect. Yes. But this... Stop it. But it didn't stop there. He was so angry. He said, she didn't stop it. She said, and he went, went on and on, and soon things were flying from one side to the other. Bang! Something hit her head and she... She screamed so loud. Quickly all the people gathered and said, what's wrong? What's wrong? What's happening? What's happening? And then Muthu said, my wife! She's disrespecting me. Really? Maragadam, what's your problem? Why don't you respect your husband? Don't you know how we women should behave? Asked the elders. Of course, she was covering her face and she was crying. And he said, listen, I asked her to make a snack. Okay, that's fine. That's not wrong. For a husband to ask the wife to make a snack. That's fine. So, and she's refusing. Maragadam, why can't you make what your husband wants? Asked the people. All that they heard. And then he said, that's it. And she's refusing. Okay, what is the snack? What is the snack that you want? And he said, and the whole village, they laughed. He got pissed off. He said, why are you all laughing? He said, there is no... What is it that you want? They all laughed. He said, no, my mother-in-law made it and I ate it. A fluffy, white snack. Juicy inside. Very nice. And at that moment, the wife showed her face. And there was a big bump on the forehead. One elderly woman in the village, among the villagers, spotted and said, hey, Maragadam, Look at your forehead. It's so big, like a korukate. And at once the husband said, that is it. Exactly. That is the name of the snack, korukate. Sorry, it is korukate. Korukate. He was reminded of the name, finally. And said, yes, korukate, korukate. And all the people laughed and said, if we say Attari Bacha, how would anybody know? It was korukate, you forgetful fellow. They laughed and they went away. But the wife was still sobbing. At once he went and said, Maragadam, I'm sorry. You know my problem, right? I'm forgetful. I get distracted. My sweetheart, I love you so much. Just for a korukate, I don't think we should be fighting. I'm so sorry, my sweetheart. A problem with Indian women when men speak like that. Immediately they melt away. So she said, it's okay. I know how much you love me. And I love you too. I shall make more korukates for you to eat. Come on in. She smiled. And her husband held on to her sari and went right behind her like a puppy. And that's the story of Attari Bacha Korukate. This is a story that my grandmother told me when I was very young. I grew up listening to stories from my grandmother and my mother. We were a large joint family. We still are. Not so large yet, but my brothers live together, so we're a joint family. And my grandmother used to have this big brass cauldron and throw in the rice, the curry, the vegetables. She would, mix everything and make it into nice rice balls and give it to us. And we'd be in a circle and we would take the food in our palms and eat. As she told stories, we would go fascinated by her stories. Harry Potter came now, but I had heard Harry Potter how many years ago? 65 years ago. I'm 68 now. From 3 years, I heard stories which were anything better than Harry Potter. So many stories. But after turning into a storyteller, I realized how stories have traveled. My grandmother told me so many stories with similar motives I find now from around the world, from around the culture. Even the story that you told, I've heard a Chinese version of the same story. Stories have traveled. And my grandmother was a street theatre artist. She was a Thirukkuth artist. Mother was an actress. So there were two different styles of storytelling. My grandmother did all these fun stories, while my mother had a lot of, strong stories, like the one Marion did. Really strong stories. So we would laugh with my grandmother, and we would cry with my mother. But both the stories brought us, or rather made us into good human beings. And that's what stories are. Because you connect the hearts and not the heads.
Can we have some music? That would be good, wouldn't it? Just to shift it up a bit.
My mouth's still watering after the idea of Chennai fish curry. I'd had in mind, because as is the case with storytellers, I've been inspired by both of you. So Dan was saying that his mum died when he was 6, and my father died when I was 4. And like the king in your story, my mum is going to be 96 years old in a couple of weeks. And she had 2 great passions in her life. One was music, and she was still playing in 2 orchestras until very, very recently, violin and viola. My dad was a Donegal fiddle player, and her other great passion was and still is her garden. She just loves gardening, and she's had to have this acceptance, as you do when you get older, that if you live to be a great age, you can't do the things that you've always done and that you love. Life sort of disappears. But she's still at home, and she still looks out at her garden every day, and she still has a carer who helps her walk up and down her garden every day. And she insists on having a pair of secateurs that she carries around with her. And as she's sort of going up and down the garden, she'll take these secateurs and sort of chop up things. It used to be quite terrifying because she refused to use one of these walkers for ages, and she used to carry like shears and all sorts of things. And you could sort of see her there, sort of go like that with the shears. It's just like, oh God, no, don't. In fact, she refuses to cut her toenails, and been saying, please, Mum, can we get a podiatrist in to. And she won't, and we've actually caught her trying to cut her toenails. And that's probably why she's lived to be 96.
She hasn't got any toes left.
But also the jumper is connected me with this story, because my dad, who's from Donegal in Ireland, he was a Donegal tweed weaver. And all my family are sheep farmers. So my granny had a mountain called Bimban, which is where the sheep were kept, and they would, shear the sheep, and then the wool would be used, and had spinning wheels and carders, and one of the things that all my family did, apart from them all being, Donegal tweed weaves, they all had the hand loom weaving sheds at the bottom of the field, was they would knit these Aran sweaters. And a lot of my relatives still do knit them. And one of my great aunts that comes to mind that I find absolutely terrifying, when I used to go over as a kid, my Aunt Ellen, she always looked like she was about 150, but she had like 2 teeth, just 2 teeth left in the bottom. And she used to insist on sort of coming, as soon as she saw us, she took with these teeth and a bottle of holy water from Lourdes, and she thought it was the greatest thing to take the stopper off this mouldy bottle of Lourdes water and sort of come towards you and do the holy water blessing. But the other thing, she was a great knitter of these jumpers, and she was always busy in the house doing everything. But what she did was she used to wear, and again I find it terrifying, this sort of, she used to wear a pair of knickers on her head, and it's because she used to always have her hair up in a bun. And so when she'd finished the work in the house and it was time everyone would go down to the hayfield to get the hay, she'd sort of walk along knitting until she got to the hayfield, and then she'd stick the knitting needle through the hole in the knickers, through the bun. And so she'd be there with these, a pair of knickers, the knitting needles, and she just never stopped talking, just never with these 2 teeth. So that's what the family did. So anyway, and my family, like yours, we used to gather when we were little in the cottage where there was no electricity and there was no running water, and we would sit and hear stories when people came in from the field, and they had a bed cupboard, a traditional bed cupboard, which was, the open turf fire, and we used to hear them, and when we fell asleep they would lift us up and put us to sleep in this bed cupboard in the room. But anyway, away over in Donegal, outside Ardra, in a wee place called Meena Braddon, which means the Valley of the Salmon, there lived a woman called Mary Ann Maguire. And one night, well, when she got the children to sleep in bed, she was sitting in front of the open turf fire, which over the top hung a big black pot and the big black kettle. And she was there sitting and she was knitting when all of a sudden there came a knock at the door. And she heard a voice which said, "Open! Open!" And she thought, who on earth is that at this time of night? And when she opened the door of the cottage, there stood an old woman. And she had silver hair pulled up in the bun and she was wearing a big turf cape. And would you believe it, she had a one horn sticking out at the front of her forehead. She said, "Open up, I'm the witch of one horn." She was absolutely taken aback, and this woman with one horn in front of her head walked past her, and she had a pair of wool carders in her hand. And she saw her, she went over and she sat down on her stool in front of the turf fire. And she took some of the wool off the floor and she started hastily carding the wool, really noisy. And she said, "Where are they? Where are they?" And she was absolutely amazed. And then there came another knock at the door. And even though she didn't want to, she felt her body pulled like magic to the cottage door. And as she opened it, standing there, wasn't there a little old woman with two horns in the middle of her forehead? And she said, "Let me in! I'm the witch of two horns." And suddenly this little woman, and she had a spinning wheel with her, and she walked past, and she sat down with the other one, and she started taking some wool off the floor, and she put it on the spinning wheel, and it went round and round and round with a clickety-clack, and the two of them were talking, and they would all went. And again she felt her body pulled to the door, and she opened it. There was a woman with three horns sticking on her head. "Let me in, will you? I'm the witch of three horns." And on it went all night. The door would knock, the call was heard, until there were 12 old women sitting in her cottage around the fire, from one with the one horn to one with 12. And they were there with their carders and their spinning wheels and their clickety-clack, and she's just sitting. It's a traditional cottage with an Irish dresser and just a bench and the turf fire, and she couldn't move. She couldn't speak, for the spell of the witches was upon her. And she could hear them talking in this strange language. They were speaking in the Gaelic, and they were speaking strange words, and they were singing a magical song like she'd never ever heard before. And she wanted to get up to move, but she couldn't move, not a single bone in her body. She wanted to call out, but she couldn't speak. And then one of the witches turned and she went, "Go and get us some water." And then she felt herself lift off the floor. And they said, "We want to make a cake." And the door of the cottage opened, and she felt herself, as if by magic, being pulled up off her feet and out of the door. And she was terrified, and she could hear them chanting and speaking in this strange language. And she walked, and she had nothing to get the water with. There was no pail outside. And she turned around to ask, and she looked in, and there were all of these witches with the horns on their heads, and they looked and they laughed. "Take the sieve." And there on the floor there was a sieve filled with holes. And she picked up the sieve, and she walked down to the well. And when she got there, it was just a traditional well dug into the earth, into the grass. And she could see there were spiders and water boatmen across the top of it. And she took the sieve and she dipped it in. But of course, every time she did it, the water just came through it. And she tried again and again. She began to sob. And she heard a voice say, "Take some of the clay, and take some of the bog cotton, and take some of the moss, and put it in the sieve." She could see no one at all, but she heard the voice again. "Take some clay, take some moss, take some bog cotton, put it into the sieve. And so she did as she was told. And around the side of the well she got a handful of clay, and she took lots of the turf, and she took some of the bog cotton until the sieve was sealed. And then as she dipped it in, sure enough, she had some water. And then she heard the voice again, for this was the spirit of the well, the fairy of the well. She said, when you reach the north corner of the house, shout out, Slin the band, the mountain of the maidens is on fire, and do this 3 times, and their spell will be broken. And as she walked back towards the cottage, carefully carrying this sieve filled with water, she reached the north side of the cottage and she shouted out, Slieven na Ban is all on fire! The mountain of the maidens is on fire! Slieven na Ban is on fire! The mountains of the maidens is on fire! Slieven na Ban is on fire! The mountain of the maidens is on fire! And she heard from inside the cottage screams and wails of anguish. And as she turned, she saw all 12 witches fly out of the cottage and fly into the sky, heading towards the mountain. Quickly, she went in and she put the sieve down. And then she saw on the table there was a cake. And they hadn't used water to make this cake. They had used blood from her sleeping family. She took the cake, and with every piece she broke it and she put it in the mouth of her sleeping children. She went back into the cottage, and there she could see the piece of material that they had been weaving. And she put half of it inside a trunk and she closed it, and half she dragged towards the door. She took the water, the feet water from which she'd washed her children's feet, and she put it over the doorway, the lintel of the croft. And then she shut the door and she took a great big piece of wood and she put it in the door, and she sat and she waited. And within moments she could hear the furious sound of the witches returning. Open the door! Open the door! Wooden beam, open the door! And the wooden beam said, I cannot, for the magic spell has been broken. And they were angry. And they shouted, Water, water, let us in! And the footwater said, we cannot, for the spell is broken and we're on the lintel going down to the lake. And she shouted, let us in, cake, let us in! But the cake had been broken and put into the mouths of the sleeping children who were coming around. And with that, they were furious and they began to cuss the fairy, the spirit of the water. And with a loud scream, they all flew back to the mountain of the maidens. But as they did so, one of the belts from the witches fell on the floor. And that belt was hanging in a cottage in Donegal, they say, for 500 years.
I know, don't worry, I'm on it, Jeeva, it's fine. And if you go to Donegal to this very day, maybe you'll get a glimpse of that belt. But for now, you're going to have to keep your belts to yourselves, or do them up because you're about to leave the auditorium. We've reached the end of the evening. I'd like us to thank our storytellers, I mean including me if you want, but can you do it in a particular way? Can everybody put your hand up here like this? There we go, lovely. Can you put your other hand up here like this? Look at that, that's good. Can you bring one hand down here like this? That's perfect. Can you bring the other hand down here like this? And I just want you to imagine that falling between your hands is one of those, what's the name of the delicious sweet treat again?
Kurukate.
The kurukate. So there's a kurukate falling between your hands and you're desperate to catch it. So just try and catch it right now. There you go. Now imagine there's lots and lots of people are there. yourselves why you don't already have one. But now, enjoy your evening, and we'll see you another time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.